This is Wild Nevadacast. I'm Dave Santina in the studio at PBS Reno in Reno, Nevada. And finally, I'm getting to meet Mike Branch, who conditioned me earlier, taught me. It's not Michael, it's Mike Branch. Everything officially says Michael, but you're a more casual guy than that. You like Mike.
Yeah, I go by Mike, but I publish under Michael P. Branch because there's a Michael C. Branch who doesn't pay his bills.
Oh.
I've had the pinky breakers after me for years, so I'm just trying to stay clear of the law, Dave.
All right, well, I appreciate that. I would like to support that. So it's
Let's both stay out of jail. How about that?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. So I've known your name forever. We've strangely never crossed paths before today, because we know a lot of the same people.
You bet.
We cross in the arts and in the Wild Nevada community because of your writings are all about living in the high desert and your experiences. And here I am running around, traveling everywhere, and learning this stuff really for the first time, because I was never Mr. Outdoorsy before that show. And so I think it's funny that it took this long for us to actually be in the same room.
It took a while. You're a legend. I'm just glad to see that you exist somewhere other than my TV. That's comforting.
That did not cost me anything. And he said that. That was amazing. All right. You're the legend. I mean, come on.
I just read it off the script you gave me, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you for reading it correctly. Because some people say legend, and I thought, they mispronounced it, just like Nevada. You have done so much, and I know you primarily from people who were either students or colleagues, because you taught forever at the university. Are you still teaching, or are you done teaching?
I just retired this last summer, yep.
Okay. But still writing.
Oh, every day.
Yeah. And so when you're listed as emeritus on the university directory, what does that even mean?
Listen, not a lot of people understand the incredible privileges that come with this, this designation. I get a parking pass for $10, and I just want to say, I've never had it better in my life. After a 35-year career, I can finally afford a parking pass. I just feel like it's a whole new life for me going forward. Dave.
That is pretty sweet. I had to say.
Hey, for 35 years, I parked behind the graveyard. Now I have a parking pass. Right. I don't use it anymore, but it's awesome to have it.
Well, congratulations, and maybe I can borrow that from you once in a while.
Absolutely.
That'd be all right. We pay every year over here. So you've retired from teaching. You're still writing, obviously.
Yep.
Yeah. You've published many books. How many books have you published?
I'm working on the 11th.
Number 11. Okay. And loads of essays, some of which became books, right?
That's right.
Rants on the Hill is the book that I actually have. I have it with me. I have a copy that was that I think I got when it was first published. I think
really?
I might have got an advance.
That's great.
Every once in a while, back when we were doing a book talk show, I'd get books delivered just at random from publishers saying, "Hey, would you take a look at this book and consider it for your show?" And I was thinking, this is the best thing ever, And I'd get books, and this book showed, and I was thrilled. So I'm much appreciative of your publishers for sharing it with me. I'm pretty sure that's how it came to be. People do bring Nevada books every once in a while and drop them off and say, "Hey, I thought you might like this in your research," or read this book and go to all the places in it. And that was what they would do for Wild Nevada. So I appreciate them. And that one in particular is all about living and raising a family in the high desert and sort of just pieces of your life turned into essays, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, being able to tell those stories about living in essentially the wilderness. I mean, a lot of people don't have the benefits that we have of living in the Great Basin, where we can have a domestic life that's immediately adjacent to a wildlife. I mean, a lot of people have to drive a long way to get to that kind of country. And if we play our cards right, we have it right outside our door. So, yeah, these are stories that I actually started telling when my kids were little. My daughters were young, and we lived way out in the boonies in the desert. And I was just so struck by how transformative it was to spend time with my girls when they were young out in these wild places in Nevada. And I started writing those stories just to capture them for myself and my family. And over time, it really turned into a whole new life for me to try to write about this landscape and about what it's like to be a father in this landscape.
Yeah, so that was, your intent was just to capture your own thoughts, and it turned into a series of books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I just didn't want to, I mean, you've probably heard the old saying about parenting that the days are long, but the years are short.
Right.
And I just had this sense that, I'm having these incredible experiences with my girls out here in this wild landscape. And I'm just so busy with work and everything else. I don't want these stories to get away from me. And over time, I realized that a lot of people sort of wanted to be part of that journey. And so it was fun. And you mentioned that some of the books come from essays. And for about 6 years, I did a monthly essay for High Country News. So the book you're mentioning there actually is kind of a compilation of that monthly account for High Country News readers of, what was going on out in the wild Great Basin. And there's a lot of humor writing, a lot of natural history writing, and a lot of Nevada-based writing, as you can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminded me, excuse me, some of it reminded me of a documentary project that we did years ago called Living in the Big Empty.
Mm-hmm.
Strange little note. First high-definition show we ever produced here at PBS Reno back in 2008, I think. It's available online, so watch it if you haven't yet. If you're watching this or listening to this, get over there to pbsreno.org and watch Living in the Big Empty, because I really like that documentary, and it's about people who choose to live out in the boonies, as you say, and some of them more like written characters than like people you'd meet on the street, and they surprise you. And I know you had characters that you wrote about,
for sure,
and that kind of. Those, I think one was Mr. Grumble Dumps was a curmudgeon who lived near you, and people like that who I remember a big Chief Rolling Mountain Thunder.
Exactly.
He was the guy who built that house out on I-80. And he was a subject of a book called Passing Through by Richard Menzies, and that was the inspiration for the documentary Living in the Big Empty. And we were able to actually get out there and tour that house.
I love that place. I've never been inside, but what a cool place.
Bizarre. And I just remember thinking how strange it was. Yeah. You talk about your daughters growing up. One of the stories that came out of that show, while we were at that house with the son of the guy who named himself Chief Rolling Mountain Thunder,
right.
His daughter arrived from Idaho to visit, and she talked to us about how he sent her out when I think she was 13 with a dog, sent her up in the hills to live for a year and become a woman.
Well, we meet some pretty outrageous characters out there. And, one of the things that fascinates me about living in the rurals in Nevada is that, you don't have many neighbors out there. The population density is real low, but also I'm fascinated by this irony that we're all out there because we want to get away from everybody else. So the one thing we have in common is that we're there not to be with each other. And yet, because of the circumstances that we live under out there, blizzards, wildfires, flash floods, we need each other actually much more than people in town do. So I do a lot of writing about that odd dynamic of how you meet all these kind of eccentric, weird, creative, interesting people out in the sticks of the high desert. And they all want to be by themselves, and yet they need each other more than ever, right? It's kind of a good metaphor for life, I think.
It is, actually. And so when you meet these people, do you become sort of grudging friends, or do they accept you? What's your experience been?
Well, I mean, what I've learned is that you have to be very careful about your topics of conversation, right? And I kind of joke that the one thing we all have in common out there is we all love the land. And if you focus on the things you have in common, it goes pretty well. But I joke that about 98% of what human beings talk about is off limits out there if you want to get along with your neighbors. So no politics, no religion, no economics, but you can talk about wildlife and weather and how frustrated you are with the latest mistreatment of the land that you love. But I really do believe that, especially in the rural West, we're not going to get much done environmentally if we don't keep our minds open to pretty diverse coalitions. So I just try to focus on what we have in common, and it does work out pretty well.
Yeah, and it can be easier to navigate with a little sense of humor. You have some of my notes from preparing to talk reference that you acknowledge the value of humor in dealing with pretty much anything, but especially difficult subjects.
Yeah, no, it's really true. And for people who really care about the natural environment, there's plenty to be angry and sad about all the time. But American environmental writing has kind of fallen into a pattern of building its argument around anger and grief. And like I get being mad and I get being sad about what we're losing, but I just think a good way to think about it for me as a writer is, hey, we all get mad, we all get sad, but I don't think any of us really want to stay that way. And so as a writer, one of the things I'm trying to do is invite readers into a conversation about things that really matter, but do it in a way that can be uplifting, that can bring them some joy. And then, of course, the best thing about humor is being able to direct it on yourself. Nobody wants to be preached at or condescended to, and one of the ways you can get readers to trust you, to relax, to engage with what you're interested in, is to show them that you can laugh at yourself first. So, a lot of the work that you've read and are commenting on, that's stuff where I was just like, man, my flaws and weaknesses are absurd, and even if I didn't point them out, my children would, and so I really think there's a lot to be gained from being able to laugh at yourself first, and then inviting people to laugh with you. It brings people together.
It does. I have only the television experience to reference, but for the Wild Nevada series, I have. There are many moments where I look a fool.
Yes, and it really works.
And it's better than if we were just going through the day and everything was perfect.
It's one of the things I love about Wild Nevada, actually, is the way you position yourself as a person who's learning, a person who's
right.
making mistakes, a person who's having new experiences. And I think people gravitate to that much more than they do to expertise. I mean, if you positioned yourself as, hey, I know more about the backcountry than you do, and I'm going to school you on it, that's not a lot of fun.
No, not at all. And what I always find ironic about this is that as many times as I have, I think, made it very clear, I don't know what I'm doing. I have now, with people who just casually are aware of that show, this reputation for being Mr. Outdoorsy, which I think is hilarious. People asking me questions about what to go, what to do, and where to go. I have some suggestions based on experience, but I am no expert, and it's just funny. But because the very first show we ever did, within the first 10 minutes, I'm failing to throw a shoe into the shoe tree. I could never do it.
I remember that.
I failed, literally. That was completely real. I failed. I never got a shoe in there. And that was just reality. And then, plenty of other times, I fall off a bike. Everybody gives me crap about that, which I deserved, but I did save the bike. It did land on me. That was not my bike. I was protecting it. I was terrified.
You did the right thing.
And dumping a kayak and by the way, Apple Corporation, I'm waiting for the commercial because I dunked that phone twice and it worked whole time. No one ever called me. I even asked about it. But it's more fun, I think, to have experiences like that to view and to see that the people who are representing you in the experience are having a real experience, including mistakes and including their foibles. And I'll never forget. I go into the bush in the kayak. I'm underwater. I flip back up, and my first thought is, "Oh my God, it's way deeper than I expected it to be here. Yeah. Where's the bottom?" And then as soon as my feet hit the ground, I thought, "This is going to actually be better for the show than if we had just cruised on down this creek." So no problem.
I totally agree. And it's not only that it's more fun; it's that it provides a wider doorway into that experience for the people who are watching you. Because if what they take away is, wow, this guy is a super stud and he is highly technical and he knows places and things that I'll never know, then you stay home, right? But if you say instead, like, well, this seems like a cool, normal guy who's out there, maybe bumbling sometimes like we all do, but still having the experience, it's much more inspiring, I think. So, I think you and I in some ways are kind of up to the same move here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was the whole point of that show, Wild Nevada, from the beginning, was let's show people what they can do. And hope they go and do it. And, there is a great satisfaction when somebody says, "Oh, I watched that and I went and I did that same trip." And I thought, great, that's the point, right? Yeah. It's not watching us, it's going out and exploring it for yourself. Yes, if you can't physically do it, it's a great armchair travel opportunity. But the joy is seeing what's out there and exploring it, because I honestly had no idea. Yeah. So I really appreciate it. And being able to read your writing helps take people along as well. Yeah. And that is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. I'll give you a quick example, I think, of what we're talking about is, you and I both have back pain. We were talking about it earlier.
Yep.
One time I blew my back out, and when I started to feel a little better, my wife said, well, now that you're feeling better, you can move a little. What do you want to do? And I said, I just want to walk. I just want to walk and walk and walk. So that year, I created this arbitrary goal that I was going to walk 1,000 miles within a 10-mile radius of my house. And that sounds really studly, but it's not. It's a couple miles a day. And so the way I wrote about it was to encourage people, hey, this can be very local. You don't have to be a long trail hiker. You don't have to be a super stud. Just get out and do some walking. So I started this 1,000-mile-a-year thing. And I've kept it up for 20, 25 years. And just this year, I actually got to the point where within a 10-mile radius of my house, I've walked about 25,000 miles, which is exactly what it takes to walk around the earth. So I walked around the earth next to my house. But what's been cool is, I've shared that piece over the years in one place or another. And, I'll get an email from somebody who says, oh, I read that, or I heard you read it at an event, and I decided to try it, and today's my 365th day, and I did it all in downtown Boston, or I did it all on my farm in Iowa, or whatever. And I think that helping people see that these experiences in the wild can be accessible to them and aren't only for a certain kind of person is really important. And you do that really beautifully on Wild Nevada.
Oh, that must have been so gratifying to have that person tell you that story.
It's neat.
It makes you inspire people. That, I think, is something that I'm curious about. You're a humble person, but you also that you inspire people with your writing. So how much do you allow yourself to acknowledge that and motivate yourself with it?
Well, I mean, for me, that comes straight out of teaching, which has been my true passion my whole life. And that's essentially the job at the beginning and the end of the day every day, right? It's not just about content. It's really about, whether you can elevate people, give them a new way to think about things, respect them in a way they haven't been respected, put them in a conversation they have never had before. So as a writer, I sort of feel the same way that, I'm not trying to provoke people to a particular activity or approach or way of thinking, but I definitely want people to feel like they can have meaningful engagement with their home landscapes, and also that their home landscape doesn't have to be Yosemite, right?
Right.
And as a guy who writes about the Great Basin, I spend a lot of time writing to audiences of people who see our home as barren, as a wasteland. Right. And I have to find ways to help them learn about it and rethink that without just saying, hey, you're wrong, I'm right. Think about it a different way. So, through humor, through inspiring people, through self-deprecation, through field trips like you do, you want to take the reader along with you and have them feel like they hung out with somebody they wanted to hang out with. They went to a place that was interesting to them, and maybe it changed their way of thinking a little bit without being lectured at.
That is absolutely the best way to go. I mean, nobody wants to be told what to think or feel. It doesn't ever work. There's one of the notes I have here that Wallace Stegner had talked about getting past the color green and associating beauty with gardens and lawns,
right? And
that you have to get used to it in what he calls an inhuman scale to understand geological time. I think that's a really interesting point of view, that especially here, if you can sort of dial your mindset into geological time versus the immediate gratification of a pretty green field or tree, suddenly you see things differently and you recognize beauty in areas maybe you never would have.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we kind of forget how the degree to which our sense of natural beauty has been conditioned by all kinds of cultural things, by film, by paintings, and so, you look at a Sierra Club calendar and see Bridal Veil Falls. You don't have to explain to somebody why that's beautiful, or the Tetons, right?
Sure.
But, this is a landscape that can appear and feel really hostile, really exposed, really cold. As mammals, we're not sure we necessarily want to be out there. But yeah, I mean, part of what I love most about being a Nevada writer is facing that challenge all the time of how do I take a landscape I really love and find a way for a reader to come into that awareness, especially when I know it's challenging their assumptions about what's beautiful and what isn't. So, I try to be really, like any teacher would, right? Nurturing and patient and inspiring and open-minded with my readers, but the starting point is often the person who drives from Salt Lake to Reno and tells you there's nothing out there.
Right.
And I just feel like, well, that tells me something about how you see and what you understand about this place. It doesn't really say anything about the landscape. So much of what we say about places kind of reflects what we've learned to see or not see yet. And I think, part of what Wild Nevada does is helps people to rethink their assumptions about what's beautiful and what is adventure and what is peace. And, but again, using humor and using myself as the butt of that humor, I'm always trying to find a welcoming way for readers to come have that experience with me.
It shows, and it's an open door. It feels very, very welcome, very welcoming. And so I think that's a lot of fun to engage with. You made me think of my wife as an example of someone who drove from Salt Lake City. She came from Atlanta, drove out here to go to grad school, years ago. And she was terrified driving through the Great Basin desert and because she saw nothing for so many miles. And I remember thinking she felt unsafe. Like, I'm so alone, right? I'm out here. There's no one out here. And she talked about how much different it felt than being in the South with trees everywhere, and you're driving a highway, but it's just lined with trees left and right.
Right.
And I thought, well, I'd feel much safer here because if I'm lost and if I'm 25 feet off the highway, everyone can see me.
Yeah, right.
There's nothing blocking your view.
Yeah.
I could take 3 steps into that grove of trees off the highway in the South, I'm gone.
Yeah.
No one will ever find me. That's way scarier to me than being in a big open space.
Yeah.
But that's the difference, right? Depth perception and sense of perception.
Right.
We've had one of our guides on one of our shows talked about having a couple of guys who came out from New York City to take a 2-week vacation. They'd never been out of the city in their lives. And this is down in southern Nevada, and he took them out, and they were stunned and they were terrified because they'd never had that sense of grand space in front of them, and it overwhelmed them. And they left in 2 days. They went back to New York. They were done. It was too freaky for them.
Yeah.
And so even just the space issues are challenges for people who aren't used to it.
I agree. I mean, think of the trope of looking out over the ocean or looking up into the stars at night and feeling so tiny in this thing that's so vast. Well, that's kind of the effect that we get in the Great Basin, and it does make you feel small, and it makes you feel vulnerable. But, you had mentioned Stegner saying we have to get over the color green, by which, he meant we need to be more self-aware about where our aesthetics and our beliefs come from and kind of think about it a little bit differently. And part of what I like about the Great Basin is that feeling. So it isn't that I've so much learned to not feel that way. It's that I've learned to appreciate the value of that in the same way that looking out over the ocean or looking into the stars at night might affect you, that there's something about the scale of the high desert that puts your struggles, your life, your obsessions, your ambitions in a different kind of perspective. And for me, that doesn't happen in every landscape. So it isn't so much that I'm a pro out there, it's that I feel humble and vulnerable, but there's something about that I think makes me better.
Yeah, absolutely. So what inspires you? Do you write automatically? Do you have a routine, or are you inspired and then you go to work?
It depends on the project, but usually it's that I've had an experience with a place or with a person that I want to explore more fully. And, I do think one of the kind of misunderstandings about writing is the idea that, well, you know what you have to say, and so you write in order to say it. Whereas I would characterize it more as you're trying to figure out something. You have a puzzle or a question or a mystery, and you use the writing to try to understand it better. And, so for me, I tend to write about things that I find either that I don't know much about and I want to learn more, and writing helps me to do that, or things that maybe I've had an experience that I feel like I can't get my arms around quite. I don't really understand what it means for me. And so often I'm using writing to try to ask myself questions and give myself a little creative space to experiment with what the answers might be.
Nice. Well, I know you're writing now. You're working on something new. Now, for people who have not gone through all of the work you've done so far, they should go back and read. By the way, one of your books has maybe my favorite title, How to Cuss in Western. I love that title.
Yeah.
But so you've got, Rants from the Hill, I think is that the most well known of your books, do you think?
It's hard to tell. Raising Wild might be better known.
Okay.
But Raising Wild, Rants from the Hill, How to Cuss in Western, those are books people are pretty familiar with. And then the most recent book is called On the Trail of the Jackalope. And I've done about 80 book events, every state in the West except for North Dakota, and that's only because they always say, save North Dakota for last. So a lot of folks know that book because people love jackalopes, and I've been on the road a lot with that book. So that was a lot of fun.
That sounds fun. Why always save North Dakota for last?
Well, it's kind of a joke that when people travel around the country, like you see those maps on RVs where people fill in the states as they go.
Yeah.
North Dakota is always last. So people in North Dakota have turned this into kind of a marketing coup.
I like it.
They're like, we're so great that people save our state for last.
I like that.
That's the only state left in the West where I haven't done a gig with the Jackalope book.
That's really fun. All right. I you know what? Probably my personal state visitation map would be the same. I'm thinking it through now. I've only been to South Dakota. Still haven't made it up to North. So maybe that's going to be the case for me. Fair enough. So you're working on a new one though.
Yeah.
So what's that about?
Oh, this project is really exciting to me. It's going to take a while, but I'm trying to tell the story of a really eclectic group of rural people in central and eastern Nevada and western Utah. And I'm talking cowboys, cowboy poets, hippies, scientists, futurists, Mormon folks, landowners, hydrologists, just this very unusual group of people who came together to try to resist an attempt by Las Vegas to pump groundwater out of eastern Nevada on a scale nobody had ever seen. So the multi-billion-dollar plan was essentially to tap the aquifers of eastern Nevada and western Utah and pump that water 300 miles to the casinos and golf courses of the Vegas area. And it was a true David and Goliath story. And this very small group of people decided, well, we're just going to stand up and stop this. And they fought for 31 years and got an absolute slam dunk clear victory, which in environmental efforts almost never happens.
Right.
And I got interested in it for a few reasons. One is that the coalition of people who stood up to this was so unusual. People, environmentalists and ranchers working together, and different kinds of people who typically wouldn't be on the same team managed to collaborate. That interested me because I think that's an important model for environmental action. There is the tension between urban and rural, which I think in the American West is a big, big deal. And also I think people don't quite realize yet that the next bonanza in the West isn't going to be gold or silver. It isn't even going to be lithium or cows. It's going to be water. And so I thought that this story of people who protected their water, especially because there was such important involvement from tribal folks, I thought, well, this is the kind of story that I could tell. Not only would it give me an opportunity to tell a great Nevada story, but I hope it'll be portable to people in other regions who are also facing threats to their water. Water is a way of life for tribal people in Nevada and also for rural agricultural people. And, the exportation of water from rural areas to cities is a huge deal right now in the American West, but it doesn't get that much attention. So it's going to be a project that has a lot of field work and a lot of interviews, but ultimately I really want to tell the story of these incredible people who actually won this battle and kept their water in the ground and protected their way of life.
I remember that story from years ago. And when you say 31 years, I flash back to doing stories here on public affairs programs about that specific subject, having multiple talk shows about it. It was an ongoing story. And it occurred to me that it kind of fell out of my head at some point, and now I look forward to reading this book, which is, I'm guessing, quite a ways down the road.
It is a ways down the road, but I'll start presenting pieces of it as I go, and trying to share it with people as I work on it. And but yeah, you're right. This was very much in the news for a long time, and it would sort of go in and out of the news cycle depending on where the fight stood at the time. But part of what motivates me too is that many of these incredible people, especially some of the cowboy poets and the tribal people who were involved, we've lost some of them in the meantime, and others are aging. And I want the story to be based on their stories. And so part of the privilege of this kind of work is to get to talk to these folks. And that was another thing that motivated me, was this sense that, we've all heard about this, but we're losing the opportunity to hear about it from the people who actually did it. So it's a very interview-based book because I want the opportunity to talk with these folks while I still can.
Makes sense. So that's, I presume, going to involve you traveling out to them rather than, I guess you could do it by phone or Zoom, but maybe it's more personal and more effective to do it face-to-face?
Yeah, it works a lot better to be on site. And, I had a young writer ask me the other day, well, how do you decide on a book topic, And I said, well, the most important thing is that you're passionate enough about it that you'll want to stick with it when it's hard, which it will be always. But also, my advice is pick something that will make you go to places you would like to go and make you talk with people you would like to talk with. So, people are always saying to me, like, you got to drive out to Ely again? You got to go out to Baker or Snake Valley or,
Right.
you sleeping in your truck again to talk to these people? And I said, yes, exactly. That was the whole concept. It's working out great.
That's fun. Well, and that's why you are who you are. Right? You look forward to that. Yeah. And I presumably people watching YouTube or listening to the podcast here are probably in the same boat, or at least curious, because why else are you here?
Yeah, right.
So we look forward to that coming down the road. We'll have to have you come back sometime and talk more about your road trips and just traveling ideas, because I love learning what everybody else likes, what everybody else recommends, and especially where to eat.
Yeah,
that's always primary on my list. All right, well, thank you for the time, and we'll have you come back down the road, and we'll follow up on the book and get more information about just all the Mike Branch stuff, because we just barely got started.
I'd love to, Dave, and I appreciate you having me, and I want to thank you guys for all those years of not only everything you do here at the studio, but all those years of Wild Nevada that have brought so many people into these beautiful places.
Well, I appreciate you saying so. There are new shows coming out, new shows in production right now. Chris is working on them, so everybody stand by. You'll be seeing those pretty soon. If you haven't seen the most recent series, again, pbsreno.org, you can watch them all. All right, before we go, I want to mention to watch Wild Nevada on PBS Reno via broadcast or streaming at pbsreno.org and many other streaming sources. Also watch segments on PBS Reno's YouTube channel. Now, if you have a question about Wild Nevada or maybe a comment, suggestion, send them to me at podcast@pbsreno.org. Special thanks to Allie Ruland, who did research and notes for this episode. And, of course, my thanks to Mike Branch. And thank you for listening to Wild Nevadacast.